Good evening. Oh, that's good. You can all hear me. Follow a video about male suicide, so I'm going to follow it with a heart attack. When I was 48 years old, I suffered a heart attack right in the middle of a busy life. And I had a 99% blockage in my main coronary artery. And a blockage in that artery, or LAD artery, is one of the ones that's referred to as a widowmaker heart attack. Without intervention, you're going to be in a bit of trouble. And I found myself lying in a hospital bed, 2 o'clock in the morning, in the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle, feeling a bit sorry for myself. And I guess if you can't contemplate life at times like that, you probably never will. And the germ of the book, The Boy in the Shed, the first book that I wrote, came about that night. And my mind just kept taking me back to my childhood. And when I was 6 years old, and you hear I'm not from these parts, I'm from Ireland. And my mother had a heart attack when I slept beside her, and I was 6 years old, and I didn't know. And in those days, they just took you away, and she was away, and they let the heart attack take its course. And this woman that was a young woman came back into my life again, and she was just less than she was. She was wrecked, actually. And the title, The Boy in the Shed, comes from, she would send me out to play. And rather than go out to play with my friends, I would climb on a coal shed behind the house, and I would watch over her when she was in the kitchen, because in my 6-year-old mind, God tried to take her when I was asleep, and I wouldn't let him take her if I was watching over her. And it had a profound effect on me. My mother's ill health, the troubles in Ireland, for those of you who are older, religion and football kind of dominated my life and shaped my life. And I'd love to say my mother's heart attack was the end of it for her, but she had her second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh heart attack, including 2 cardiac arrests before I was 12 years old. And it had a deeply unsettling effect on me as a boy. It made me quite a shy person. As a shy adult, it made me quite clingy to her, because I was frightened this thing that I loved the most in the world would be gone at any moment. And that was a feature of my whole childhood. But actually, the troubles raged around me when I was a child, but they never really came into I just saw it on the TV, and until one day it came into my home. And before it came into my home, we were in a town called Lisburn in Ireland. It's now a city. And we were a big Catholic family in a big Protestant town. But all my friends were Protestants, so I used to help the Protestant boys collect wood for the bonfire. And one of the days I was just coming, just 2 days before the bonfire, and the bonfire was to celebrate the Catholic King James's defeat at the hands of Protestant King William in 1690. We've got very long memories in Ireland, by the way. And this little boy came out, and the boy's a big lad, he had a cigarette in his mouth, and he's about 11 years old, and he said, "You can't come in the den." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Because you're a Fenian bastard." And I knew I was hurt, but I didn't quite know why I was hurt. And I went home to my mum and I said, "What's a Fenian bastard?" And she said, "You are, son." and she kind of sat down and told me all about the place that we lived and the troubled times we lived. And it was a it was a very eye-opening moment. But really the troubles, as I say, didn't come into my home until I was lying in bed one night. There was a loud crash, there was a huge bang, and frantic footsteps on the stairs, and my father burst in through the bedroom door, and he grabbed me out of bed, and he dragged me downstairs in my underpants, and I stood there and I watched flames licking through our home from the petrol bomb that had been thrown into our home. And I watched my ill mother and my sister who was pregnant, my father, good people, have this futile attempt to try and stop our house from burning down. And they sent me to a friend's house to go to sleep. And I woke up in the morning and I was soaking wet, and I'd wet the bed. And I did so many times. Such was the stress at that particular moment. But football was my escape. Always was my escape. I was a very talented footballer from a very young age. So much so that when I was 11 years old, Bob Bishop, the scout that sent George Best to Manchester United, was sending me alongside Norman Whiteside. I'm sure some of you will know Norman. And I got to Salford Halls of Residence, and I went into this room, the student's room, and I lay awake all night thinking, don't go to sleep because you'll wet the bed, don't go to sleep. And I fell asleep just in time to wet the bed, every night. At Sodden Underpants aside, the trial went amazingly well, and Manchester United wanted me to come back every school holiday with Norman. So traumatised was I by it, I begged my mother never to send me again, and I didn't want to go. And I told her I was going to be great at school. And school for me at the time was St Patrick's Secondary School in Lisburn, because I failed my 11 plus just around the time of the petrol bombing and the bedwetting stuff. And she let me settle into school. I settled into school. I met my then girlfriend, who I'm very proud to say is now my wife of goodness me, 38 years, and she was at the posh school, I was at the other one, and life was good, and the only blot on my landscape was religion, specifically the Catholic Church, and specifically one particular parish priest who used to come into our school every Monday morning and tell me a different way that I could get into hell. And he came one morning and he said, if you break the 6th commandment, you're going to hell. And I thought, the 6th commandment? Oh, I shall not commit adultery. I'm okay. And then he said, you can break the 6th commandment if you're not married. And I thought, oh, okay. He said, you can break the 6th commandment in the privacy of your bedroom by touching yourself. What a way to spoil that bit of fun, I can tell you. But football and religious bigotry really got me away from everything that I knew and loved. There was a scout that came to our home, and he was a scout for a team called Linfield, who, much like Glasgow Rangers back in the day, didn't play Catholics, but he came to our home, big Protestant town, thinking we were a Protestant family, and he walked in and you could see his head swinging around the room, looking at all these holy relics that wouldn't be out of place in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And he said, you can't play for Linfield, but you're too good to be here. You need to go across the water. So I went. He said, my friend's a scout at Newcastle. Go there. So I went to Newcastle, and I found myself standing 2 weeks later on a wet and windy night. I was a left winger in Whitley Bay, and I got the ball, and I'm on trial. And I'm running at this fullback, and a little teammate's inside me, and he's shouting, give it to me, give it to me. So I dummied to give it to him. The fullback bought the dummy. I went round and scored on my trial. It's a great way to start a trial. So I get the ball again. I'm running at this fullback. He's terrified of me now because I'm lightning quick. And this little teammate's inside saying, give it to me, give it to me. So I dummied that way, passed it to him, and I said, give it to me, give it to me. And he just put his arms like that, put his foot in the ball, and he said, fuck off. And I said, what? He said, fuck off. If you don't pass to me, I don't pass to you. And that was the first time I met Paul Gascoigne. and Gaza not passing to me aside. I went home, the trial went amazingly well, and I'd barely got home, and Newcastle United were offering me a 2-year apprenticeship to go straight back. And every adult in my life lost their mind. It was like they were offering me £10 million. My mum and dad said, you have to go. My boys' club manager said, you have to go. My careers teacher said, you have to go. The only person who didn't want to go was me and my girlfriend. But I did go. And I went to, and about a month after first hearing of Newcastle United, I was living in a different country for me, in a city I didn't know, with a family I didn't know. And I don't mind telling you, I cried myself to sleep more times than I care to imagine. And I thought I wouldn't last a week. But I did last, mainly because the football went really well. And 6 months after arriving in Newcastle as a young 16-year-old boy, I made my debut for the first team in May the 1st, 1982, and I became the youngest player ever to play for Newcastle United. And to give you some context, I went home in the June, and my friends from school were doing their GCEs or their GCSEs, my friends from my class. And they're looking at me thinking, oh, Paul's a superstar footballer, and I'm looking at them, I want to be in class with you. But I went back, and I settled, and my all-time hero, Kevin Keegan, arrived as a superstar, and actually, within a month or 2 months, he was all over the press, and he was saying, Paul Ferris is the best young footballer I've ever seen for his age. And if I'd have been a different personality, it would have lifted me to here. But the personality I was, it shrunk me slightly, and I got lost in his shadow for a little while. But that wasn't my big concern. My big concern was I just decided that I was really stupid. And that came about because everywhere I'd go in Newcastle, I would say to people, they'd say, what do you do for a living? And I'd say, well, I'm a footballer. And they'd say, well, you must be thick. And they'd say, where are you from? And I'd say, Ireland. And they'd say, Irish and a footballer, you must be doubly thick. So I was walking around Newcastle thinking I was the thickest person in Thickville until I was jogging behind 2 senior players one day. And one of them said to the other one, what does your wife do for a living? And he said, oh, she's an estate agent. And he paused and he said, you lucky bastard, that's your holidays sorted, isn't it? So maybe I wasn't so thick after all. But Kevin left, and I grew into learning how to be a professional footballer. And when I was 19, I managed to score my one and only goal in senior football. It's in James's Park at the Gallagher end, and I can bore you with a video of it later on if you want to see it. But it's actually a very good goal. But I thought it was the first of many, and I got a very nasty injury straight afterwards, and I knew more than the medical people that I was in trouble. But I went through this process of a 2-year journey of getting fit, breaking down, and eventually Newcastle United ran out of patience with me, and they shipped me out the back door of the career that I thought I was going to have for the next 10 years. And I called at a friend's house with my then girlfriend, and I said, look, we need somewhere to stay. I've got no home, and I'm not fit for work. And she said, well, you can come and stay here, but you need to go to the unemployment office because you're unemployed. And so she took me the next day to the unemployment office in Newcastle, and I walked into this building, a big, nasty grey building, and I'm standing in a queue with all the other miserable people. And a chap tapped me in the shoulder, and he said, are you Paul Ferris, plays for Newcastle United? And I looked around the room where I was, and I said, not anymore, no. And I went to the front of the room, and I spoke to this woman, and she wouldn't let me have a private conversation. I told her all my business in public. And she was really unhelpful, and I said, and I'm not fit for work. And she said, well, you need to go to St. James's. And I said, St. James's Park, Newcastle United. And she said, no, St James's Place, the welfare office, behind Newcastle United. And about a month after leaving the football club, I was standing in the shadow of the stands of the stadium in a welfare office with a guy who just either peed a can of special brew out of himself or he poured it over himself. And I spoke to a lovely girl behind the counter who heard my plight, and I left there with an emergency welfare check and a bit less dignity than I had when I entered the room. And I went to my friend's house and I was speaking to my mum, and she was upset and she wanted me to come home, and I was upset and I wanted to come home, but I didn't want to go home a failure. And I said to her, look, let's go off the phone and have a cup of tea. And she said, yeah, okay. And I went off the phone and I had a cup of tea, and she went off the phone and died right in the middle of our conversation. And the thing that I feared most in my life happened just when I was least able to cope. And it felt like to me, I don't mind saying it in this room, someone switched the lights out. That's what it felt like to me. And they've never come on quite as brightly since. I don't mind saying that either. But if it wasn't for the love and support of my then girlfriend, who'd come across to be the professional footballer, she went and got a job in a shop. She got us a council flat while I just wallowed in self-pity for months. And then I heard this advert, and it said, be the best you can be. And it was Newcastle College, like a further education college. And I just, in a whim, just walked in the door and said to this woman, I want to do some A-levels. And she said, do you have any O-levels? And I said, no. She said, well, you can't do A-levels. You need to learn how to, we need to know you can read and write and stuff, so you need to do this foundation course. So I did that, and I enrolled in a physio degree. But they made me wait a year, so I did A-levels in history and politics, and they went really, really well. And I thought about jumping off. That's relevant to what I'm going to tell you, but I didn't. I stayed the course. And 1993, got my physio degree, and in 1993, very soon after that, I was offered a job at Newcastle United, and I walked back through the front door of that football team that had shipped me out the back door 7 years before. And it was a fiercely proud moment. I was there from 93 as a physio to 2006. So I was there through Kevin Keegan's time, Kenny Dalglish's time, Ruud Hullit's time, Bobby Robson's time, Graham Souness's time, some great managers there and a couple of whoppers as well. So I was there, but actually it was Kevin's time was the magical time. Of football was like that. It was just an amazing place. It was this entertaining team, and I can't remember the game, but it just seemed like there was a new superstar arriving every day. And one particular lad arrived, and he was called Faustino Asprilla, for the older people in the room, and he was a Colombian with a very suspect temperament and a very suspect reputation. And Kevin Keegan sat him down, and he said to him and his agent, who don't speak very good English, I'm thinking about playing you today. Nothing from the two of them. And he said, I'm a bit concerned about his temperament. Nothing from the two of them. And then Kevin's exasperated and said, he's very volatile. Nothing from Tino. And the agent went, yes, he's very volatile. He play left wing, he play centre forward, he play right, he's very, very volatile. But Kevin's time came to an end. Something was changing in me. If you're a physiotherapist in professional football and you want to better yourself, you would do a master's degree in sports medicine or a master's degree in manipulation. I chose to do one in history of ideas. If anybody knows what that is, please come and tell me afterwards, because that's very... So I did this master's degree in history of ideas, but I'm trying to get a pay rise off of then chief executive, who's the miserablest man in the world. I don't mind telling you that either. And he's just saying no to everything. And I said, exasperated, but I've got a master's degree now. And he said, why didn't you say? What's that in? And I said, well, history of ideas. And he said, that will get you 50% of fuck all in life, won't it? And he was right, and I hated him for it. And I went home to my wife and I said, look, if I'm doing master's degrees in philosophy and history of art, and I don't want to be a physiotherapist. She said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I've always had this crippling shyness. I think I've got ability. I think I want to challenge myself. I want to be a barrister. And she said, Jesus Christ, I said, I want to be a barrister. She said, okay, how are we going to pay for that? And I said, well, you know the house, our dream home here, we've got 2 staircases. I thought we'd block that side off, put a kitchen on there, sell that half, and then we'll live in this half until I start making money as the world's next great barrister. And she's as thick as me, and she said, yeah, that's a great idea, let's do that. So I studied law part-time when I was a physio at Newcastle United. I'm going to Champions League games, I'm going to Kiev. I can remember clearly back to the hotel and the law books. It was a tough old slog for 2 years to convert to law. And in 2006, I sold my home, half my home, and I left Newcastle United, and I went to bar school. And in 2007, I'm very proud to say I was called to the bar at Middle Temple, one of the great Inns of Court in London, one of the 4 great Inns of Court. But even that night didn't go so smoothly for me. It's the first time your family see you wigged and gowned. So I went in the back of this room, got my wig and gown on, my son's out there and my wife's over there, and it's a big room like this, and at the top of that room is a very important man, and you come out the back door, and he stands up there, and he taps his staff, and he literally calls you to the bar. So he says, ladies and gentlemen, call to the degree of the utter bar I give you. And the girl before me got ready, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, call to the degree of the utter bar I give you Miss Fanula Hadjer Fanny. And I thought, oh, fuck's sake. As soon as I heard Fanny, I thought, fuck. I looked at my son, he's 15, he's like biting his lip. My wife's in howls of laughter. And the whole place is in uproar as I walk up to get called to the bar, and no one even knows I was called to the bar. So Fanula had you, Fanny. She's probably a very big lawyer now, but she ruined my call to the bar. But actually, anybody who knows the law, getting called to the bar is the easy bit. Getting a pupillage is the hard bit. So I was offered a pupillage in London, and I'm very proud to say, in front of 600 applicants, 2 Bedford Row. Had I been younger, I would have taken it, but I was 42 years old with 3 kids, so I didn't want to go to London. And the only other place I could go was Leeds, so I went to Park Court Chambers in Leeds, New Park Court Chambers, in front of 300 applicants. So you kind of won the race. You're well there, and I'm practicing criminal law, very happily leaving that world behind me. And Euro 2008's on, I'm watching Alan Shearer on the screen at the night time, and one of the mornings I'm coming back from Leeds, and I got a phone call from Alan Shearer, who I'm sure needs no introduction. And he said, I'm taking over Southampton Football Club, Paul, and I want you to run the sports medicine, sports science side of this with me at Southampton. We might go to Newcastle, we might go to England, but I'm going to be the world's next great manager, and I want you right beside me as my sidekick. And I said, I'm a barrister now. And he said, I was always going to ask you. And I said, couldn't you have asked me before I sold half my house, spent all my money, and nearly killed myself studying law? He said, well, you want to hear what these people have to say. And I went to his home on a Saturday morning, and I sat with these businessmen who said, we're taking over Southampton next week. You're going to be the manager. How much money do you want, Paul? I told them double what I wanted. They said, that's great. I said, thank you very much. I went into my chambers on the Monday morning and walked out of the career I've been pursuing for 4 years because I thought Alan Shearer was going to be the world's next great manager. And I'm watching Sky breaking news on the Wednesday, and Southampton was taken over just by Marcus Liebner, not the people we were talking to. And I'm sitting at home watching it in my underpants thinking, Jesus Christ, you're a barrister who doesn't practice law. You're a physiotherapist who doesn't practice physiotherapy, and you've got a young family. Well done. And I was fretting a little bit, but I didn't have long to wait because Alan got a job, for those of you who are football fans, he got a job as manager of Newcastle United, interim for 8 weeks at the end of the 2008-2009 basket case of a season. If you go back and look at him at that point, he's got collector's items, some hair, and I'm standing 2 foot away from him, looking much younger, much thinner, much more handsome than I am tonight, standing this way in case anything stuck so no one knew I was there. But we worked our socks off and we just fell short, and the club was relegated, but it wasn't lost. We sat with the then owner and we shook hands on a deal to be the management team for the next 3 years of Newcastle United on a salary that again would have transformed my life. The only problem is we never heard from them again. So now I am in a hole. And in a mad panic, and this is relevant, I decided I was a writer. So I wrote a novel called An Irish Heartbeat. Because to try and occupy my mind, so I wrote this novel called An Irish Heartbeat, and I sent it off to 5 agents, and I'm still waiting for a response. No one responded. So I published it online, and I just forgot about it. And then I had a really uncomfortable conversation with my wife when I told her I needed to sell the other half of her dream home. Which it's never an easy conversation. And Alan was going here, there, and everywhere. But in the end, he went nowhere. He went nowhere. And I was at his 40th birthday party, a bit disillusioned with life in general, and I bumped into a chap called Graham Wiley, who may mean something to some people in this room. Graham Wiley was a tech entrepreneur who built Sage Pay. And I chatted to him, and from that conversation, I'll not bore you with because we're not here to sell Speedflex, we formed Speedflex together. Me, the chief executive, him as the chairman, and I'm proud to say we're here today, still in that capacity. And just in the building of that company, and all that it entailed, the heart attack happened. And I spent the next 3 years trying to recover physically and mentally from that. And I started to type on 2 fingers this manuscript that would become The Boy in the Shed. And I finished it in 2016, but it didn't get published until 2018. And by the time it got published, my life had taken a whole different turn. So I need to take you on that journey, because my second book's called The Magic in the Tin, but The Magic in the Tin has its origins back in 2013, was a shocking year for my family. That was the heart attack. And I'm in this room with a urologist. And he said to me, that stubborn kidney stone you got, Paul, I know how to get rid of it. And I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to stent your penis, and I'm going to put this probe into your urethra, and then I'm going to put it through your bladder and into your kidney. I'm going to take the probe, the kidney stone, back through your kidney, back through your bladder, back through your, out through your stented penis. And he completely lost me at stented penis, by the way. So I said, look, the stone's not that bad. It's okay. I'm fucking. I don't even know why I'm here. I'm a bit of a wuss. I don't know. And he said, have you ever had your prostate exam? And I looked at his fingers, and genuine, the fattest fingers I've ever seen in my life. And I said no, and I think I don't want one. And he was very persuasive. And before I knew it, I was knees bent, staring at a crack in the wall that needed filling in. And he was up the back of my bottom, and he's poking around, and he takes his finger back out, and he says, very happily, you have an enlarged prostate. It's quite smooth, and nothing to worry about. And I thought, well, if you're not worrying, I'm not worrying. I'm out of here. Off the ground, trousers up, gone. just at the end of putting the finishing touches to the manuscript of The Boy in the Shed, I'm sitting with my friend, who's a Manchester United fan. He's sitting and he said, oh, Christ, I'm dribbling more than Georgie Best at the minute, man. I said, what? I said, well, what? He went, I've got an enlarged prostate. I said, well, I've got one of those. He said, did you have all the tests done and everything, for the PSA tests and the bit that differentiate between prostate cancer? I said, no. And he said, are your symptoms getting better? I said, no, they're getting worse. He said, I think you need to go to the doctor. So I went to my doctor, and I don't know, for the rest of you, I don't know if this is me or not, I walked in and it wasn't my doctor, it was a locum. And I was so relieved it wasn't my doctor when I put his finger up my backside. Is that, I'd rather have a stranger do it. I wouldn't want that. And actually, this reminds me, apologies for this, but if anybody's ever seen, if you haven't seen this, look at Rick Wakeman from Yes, his acceptance speech in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame about a prostate examination. And he said, he goes in, he lies down, doctor bends his knees up, puts the glove on, puts his finger up his bottom, and he says, don't worry, Mr. Wakeman, it's not unusual to get an erection during this procedure. And he says, well, I haven't got an erection. The doctor said, no, but I have. So my doctor, the locum doctor with the fat fingers, he put his finger up there as well, and then he said, he was much more concerned. He said, your prostate's not enlarged, it's hard, and I can't feel the sulcus. And he was very concerned, and he said, you need a PSA test. He did that. It came back, and I was outside the bell curve, looked like it was cancer. He said, don't worry, you'll get a 2-week appointment, fast-track appointment at the hospital. And I did. I got a fast-track appointment, and then got another letter that said, ignore that letter, you're going to get a different surgeon's going to see you. And that was in the March. So April, May, June, July, August passed, and I was on a family holiday in Boston, and we happened to be watching Coldplay in concert at the Patriots. Don't judge me for the Coldplay in concert. We're watching Coldplay in concert at the Patriots Stadium, and I went into one of these big troughs to have a pee, and I'm trying to have a pee, and nothing coming, like nothing, to wee dribble. And there's a big American hitting me in the back saying, are you going to pee? Are you going to go, buddy? And I was like, oh, and I looked at him and thought, oh yeah, I'm going to get away. So I walked off, came back round again, tried to go again, couldn't go, went in and said to my wife, during the encore, I'm in a bit of trouble here, and I'm going to phone the hospital. So I phoned the hospital, and I was lost off the system. They lost me off the system for 5 months. And I walked in to see a urologist, and again, for the gentlemen in here, if you are going to see a urologist about prostate cancer, maybe don't bring your wife, because it can get quite embarrassing. Because I only just walked in, he said to me, Mr. Ferris, are you still having sex at 51? And I looked at my wife and I thought, we live at number 38. I don't know how he knows that. But my wife, if she was here, would hate that joke, but that's fine. But she's not here, she'll never know. And it was actually 36. But anyway, he basically, I barely sat down, he said, look, you have a significant prostate cancer. I'll do some more tests with it, but I'm telling you, and your course of action is either a prostatectomy, removal of your prostate, or radiotherapy and hormone treatment. And the prognosis is good for you because it's early stage. So, but the side effects of the prostatectomy are erectile dysfunction, impotency, urinary incontinence, bladder complications, bowel complications. And I said, what about the other one? He said, well, that's erectile dysfunction, urinary incontinence, bladder complications, bowel complications, impotency, and it's loss of libido. And I was only 51 and I still wanted to have a libido. So I said, well, I'll go down that route of getting the prostate out. And that was around December 2016. You're a bit low in life, and life's kicked you a couple of times. And I said to Geraldine, my wife, let's send 3 chapters of The Boy in the Shed off to some agent to see if we get some good news. And we sent it off to 5 agents. And within an hour, an agent came back to me and he said, don't give this to anybody else, send me the whole thing, but I think I can get you a publisher, not just any publisher, one of the big publishers, and this is going to be big. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. And then my granddaughter was born. And you all look very young here. But that hit me like a thunderbolt. I wasn't expecting it. And her presence in the world just elevated me to somewhere that I thought I couldn't get to again. And I went in to have my prostate out earlier in the year. And I walked in, I sat down with the same urologist, and he had this big sheet of paper in front of him in the morning of the surgery. And it said, purpose of surgery to cure cancer. And that's a pretty good place to be. And then he said, possible side effects. Erectile dysfunction, urinary incontinence, bladder complications, impotency, bowel complications, penile shrinkage. I said, penile shrinkage? He said, yeah, penile shrinkage. I said, have you told me that before? He said, yeah. I said, who signs up for this? He said, you do, sign there. I mean, some of you gentlemen in here, I don't know about you, but some of us can't afford to lose. There's no way I was going from 9 inches to 7 inches for anybody, I can tell you. Look, I know that's a cheap joke. It was 8 to 6. But I signed it in, had my surgery, in I go, and it all went well. And a nurse sidled up beside me, and she pulled a little drain out of my side, and she put a pouch on the side of it, and I fell asleep with the catheter in. And I woke up, and they let you out the next day, and I woke up, and the bed is soaking. I thought, oh my God, I've wet myself with the stress of this again. I'm back to being 6, 9, 10. And I looked, and there was blood everywhere. And I called the nurse, and I found myself standing with my gown up over my shrunken penis, looking down at it with blood everywhere, with just this catheter dangling, and 3 young nurses wiping all around me. Is horror porn a genre? I'm just asking. Because that's what it was like. And that was the worst film you've ever seen, that is your genre. But I didn't feel very manly that day. I felt pretty sick, and I went home. And for the first 3 days, everything was fine. And then 3 days in, my wife came into the room, and I said, Geraldine, for Christ's sake, that perfume, stop, it stinks. I'm not a charmer, by the way, but and she said, and okay, so she changed her perfume. She came and I said, Geraldine, your hair is absolutely stinking. You need to wash your hair. She's like, what? I said, honestly, and your breath. Can you see that kind of marriage, can't you? So something was wrong. So we phoned the doctor, and we said, look, he's really nauseous. And she said, look, you're going back in to have your catheter out in 3 days' time. Go in and get that done and tell them about it then. And I got into the hospital to get the catheter out. Geraldine had to walk me from the car to get in. I could hardly walk. And I walked in, and there's 2 old gentlemen, about 15 years older than me, chatting away, and I could see their bag of urine down there, and they're just chatting. And I thought, either I'm a wuss or there's something wrong. And I went into this nurse, and I said to her, I'm having this problem. She said, do you have any underpants? And I said, I don't wear underpants, and I haven't worn any for 30 years. I don't know why I'm telling you that as well. Why would I say? Well, seriously, it's very unhygienic. And she said, here, put these net things on, and here's a little pad. Like in the 70s, we would have called it a fanny pad. Not a fanny fanny pad, but a fanny pad. And we had this pad, and she said, I'm just going to deflate the balloon, and I'm going to take it out. So just breathe out. So I breathed out. She deflated the balloon, it went out. And a big clump of blood came out, and I thought, oh my Jesus. And she said, you need to go to the bathroom, Paul, and have a pee and make sure all your bits are connected. So I went into the bathroom, and I started to pee, and a bit of blood came out, and then a bit of urine came out, and the bathroom started to swim that way, and I fell and banged my head, and I came round, opened the door, and I was back in the ward again within 10 minutes. And there was a young doctor came to get me, and I was there, and I can remember very clearly, he's slapping my hand, he's saying, you're very white. And I actually said to him, I'm Irish, I'm practically blue. Like, and he said, no, that's not, he said, we'll do some tests. And he did some tests, and I got a diagnosis of sepsis and anemia. And I was very ill, and again in a very low place. And these things in my life, and maybe in your life, they just happened. I was really ill, and I got an email from the agent that said, Hodder and Stoughton, one of the world's great publishers, want to publish your book next February. And I got an email from a company. That turns out they were nonsense, but at the time it was, are you Paul Ferris, who's written a book called An Irish Heartbeat? If so, has anybody taken film rights options for it? And I thought, no one's even read it. Jesus Christ. So those 2 things happened just when I was at my lowest point, and I came out of hospital, and my focus then was in just trying to get healthy, trying to get continent, trying to get an erection back. I was having no success in the erection front. Continence came back. But I had bigger worries because my first appointment back at the doctor, he said, I'm really sorry, but your PSA is elevated and you've got a positive margin. And any of you have been in the cancer journey, you don't want to hear positive margin because it means your cancer cells are still there. And he said, look, you're going to have to go in and have the hormone treatment and the radiotherapy that you didn't want in the first place. So it's going to smash your libido. And the nerves that we spared to your penis is going to obliterate those. So basically, you're never going to have a natural erection again. But I had no other choice. And just before the publication of The Boy in the Shed, I'm at the hospital. The hormone treatment's kicking in. I'm doing my radiotherapy treatment. I'm putting the finishing touch to this book. This book came out in February 2018. And I'm astonished even to say this. It very quickly became a runaway best-selling book. But more importantly, it became the Sunday Times Sports Book of the Year. It became the Times Sports Book of the Year. It became the Daily Telegraph Football Book of the Year. It was the British Sports Book Awards Autobiography of the Year. It was William Hill shortlisted, and it was optioned for TV and film. And I thought, Jesus Christ, I'm a writer. Wow, this is unbelievable. That's what I was all along. I'm going to write this. So I wrote An Ugly Game. A manuscript is still sitting down beside my chair because no one wants it. So that's quite chastening that it happened. But on the surface, everything was good in my life. My granddaughter, and for those of you, I saw an American bumper sticker once that actually said, if I had known grandchildren were this good, I'd have had them first. And I really believe that. And this girl was a shining light for me. The Boy in the Shed was doing really, really well, but I'm in this dark place with this side effects, a dark place mentally and physically. And I thought, maybe I'll write my way out of this. Maybe I'll write something. And I started to write about the pain I was in. And when I say pain, I didn't realize how much not having an erection would affect me as a man. I sound stupid. You go to speak to nurses and they'd say, if there's 2 of you in a room having sexual relations, you don't need an erection. And I'm telling you, there's a man and a woman in a room, or 2 men in a room, an erection is a good indicator that you want to be in the room. And it's difficult to cope with that. And so I went on this odyssey of trying to see if I can get that back. And I went and some of you have heard the story before, so I won't do it today. I went to see about getting a penis pump fitted, but I'll leave that. And then I went to see this surgeon about having a penile implant. And he said, just drop your trousers. I drop my trousers for everybody these days, so just beware. He said, drop your trousers. And I dropped my trousers, and he lay me down, and he got my penis between his finger and he got my penis between his two hands. And I'll give you two fingers and a thumb. And he did 2 fingers and a thumb, and he pulled it up like that. And I'm looking down at it, and he said, that's the length your penis is going to be with the implant. And I genuinely said, can you stretch it a wee bit further, like just a wee? And he said, no. And I said, well, I'm not having that. I'm putting myself through that. So I started to write The Magic in the Tin. And my granddaughter was, as I say, we were in the forest walking around COVID time. And she has a little magic tin. It's a Vaseline tin that I put some sweets and some bits and pieces in. When she comes on, she thinks it's magic. And we're in the forest. And she said to me, Granda, who puts the magic in my tin? And I said, oh, it's magic. And she said, I think it's you. She was only 4 at the time. I said, well, how can it be me? Because you've got to come and tell me what it is. If it was me, I'd know what it was. And she seemed to buy. I'm a good liar, by the way. She bought that, and she was happy with that. But my son took a photograph of us just as she was asking that question. And if you ever do buy The Magic in the Tin, it's on the front of the book, and they should have made it bigger, because if I wasn't the publisher, I would have made it bigger. And I had this photograph on my wall for Christmas. It was just there, and I'm still writing this book, and I'm like, I love that photograph, and I don't know why. I love that photograph. And then towards the end of the writing process, I was running up a hill. I was hobbling up a hill, like a wee fat man that I am, and I was hobbling up a hill, and I slipped and I fell, and I banged my head, and I was lying there, and this icy water was running down my back, and I'm swearing at the universe, swearing at everything, fucking cancer, heart disease, you dopey fat. I call myself names because I like that. And I got home, and I cleaned myself up, and I'm putting the final touches to this book. And I looked at that photograph, and honestly, it was just like a moment, and I thought, she has my mother's eyes. This child has my mother's eyes. 40 years after this woman left, she's right there in that photograph. And there's magic in that. And I looked at the magic tin, and I thought, the same child's going to come in and see magic in a stupid little tin. And pull yourself together. If she can see magic in that, you can see magic in life. You can see magic anywhere. It's your choice. It's your choice to either go that way or go that way. So I just decided that day that's what I was going to do. And The Magic in the Tin, I'm proud to say, was published by Bloomsbury 2022. And it did remarkably well, considering it's a book about my penis, to be honest. And Alan Shearer, who's written the forewords to my books, got an early copy of The Magic in the Tin, and he rang me up and said, Paul, I think it's fantastic, but I did not think it was possible for one man to speak about a hard-on for 7 chapters of a book. And I said, I think it was 9 chapters, I think, but it was doing remarkably well. And I'm sitting with a playwright guy that I'm friendly with. I have a cup of tea with him, and he said, Paul, the next book you need to write, a bit more light-hearted. It needs to be about all those funny, weird, and wonderful stories that happen at Newcastle United behind the scenes at a football club. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about them all tonight. And I started to write this book called Seasons in the Sun, of all those funny, quirky things. And if anybody wants bored silly at the bar later on, I'll be in the corner boring the life out of you about them. And I wrote it, and very quickly publishers and I should take a step back. I wrote a manuscript called The Man in 119, and no one wants that either, but I think it's my best bit of writing, but no one likes my fiction. So I wrote this other book, and it got published, and it came out in May 20 of this year. And it is already on its 4th reprint, which is really good, and it's on course to sell multiple thousands of books, which is just remarkable for me. So that takes us almost up to date. I'm not. If you see me standing at this place in a year's time, and I'm really thin and I'm really healthy, I'm either taking GLP-1s because I now know all about those today, or I'm not happy. So you're looking at me now when I'm not coping very well at times, and I don't mind saying that because I'm struggling sometimes still with some of the side effects, but I'm doing okay. And my granddaughter continues to be this amazing presence, as I say, in my life. And I had this idea Speedflex is doing really well. I've got some brilliant staff sitting there, friends that I regard as friends sitting there, and I'm proud of that too. And I was just sitting at home last week, and I thought the right thing for you to do now, Paul, is to write another book because you've got a career in writing. So I thought, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll write a play. So I've decided I'm going to write a play. So if you're ever at a theatre somewhere in about 5 years' time and it's a shit play, look to see who might have written it. It could well be me. But I actually just came to me in the room. Here's a cheesy finish for you. I've had a wonderful life. And the most of it is behind me. There's a lot in front of me, and I'm going to treat the new bit of it like the holiday it always should have been. And when we all think about our life, isn't it about love, actually? So there's your Christmas theme for finish. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you.